All right, me. It is the August 6th. It's Wednesday. And I've just finished reading Dan Brown's Origin, which is the fifth and currently final book in the Robert Langdon series. This brings me my total up to what this is about 450. That one's about 450. That's 900. So about 1,000 pages in the past 3 days. So I guess good job, me. Certainly, I know a lot of people read a lot more than that. But yeah. I think this book is really interesting in terms of the Robert Langdon stuff. Simply because I feel it's almost like it's a rewriting of Angels and Demons, except with our roles reversed, right? Because in Angels and Demons, right, it is this standoff between a religious organization and the scientific organization, and it is the goal, or it is basically the scientific community is threatening terrorism on the religious community, and it's up to Robert Langdon to solve these things to then save the Vatican, right? Whereas this one, right, is that the entire build-up throughout the book, as it is intended, is that it is this religious organization versus the scientific organization, and is Robert Langdon attempting to save the scientific organization after a terrorist attack, effectively, or after assassination, right? And it is so in that sense, right? It's really really interesting to see this kind of reversal of roles and reversal of how Robert Langdon is usually portrayed, because usually he's portrayed on the side of like protecting an organization's secrets or something like that. So that's really interesting. You know, the I think this book does a lot better in terms of the twists, right? Because the twists, instead of like in Inferno, right, where I was talking about, where like it just seems like the twists just keep on coming and keep on coming and keep on coming. The twists at the end here seem to do a lot more, or come kind of as all one big realization, and therefore I think I end up liking it a bit more. I think it makes a bit more, not necessarily even sense, but like it just reads smoother in this way. And then it's not as like cerebral as the other pieces that have that Robert Langdon is involved with and Dan Brown has written, right? It's not as cerebral. It's much more of a thriller than it is like this kind of like, with Angels and Demons, and with Da Vinci Code, and with even like The Lost Symbol, and even to an extent Inferno. And there were these kind of puzzles that existed, and this one just really doesn't have that, which is fine, right? This sets out to be much more of a thriller than it is anything else, right? Which is fine. Which then I think makes sense as to why you have this situation, right, in which you have, instead of it being about Robert Langdon trying to figure all these things out and solve all these things, it is Winston, who is this AI that's been created, that is doing almost all the solving, doing all the leading to where they need to go, all of this stuff, right? And it's right, obviously the twist at the very end that kind of reveals that like this actually all is Winston's fault, and it is there are no puzzles, because it was Winston's intention for them to do this at the exact right time and all these things to be happening. So yeah. Um, I think in a broader sense, right, it is more about this conversation between what is the fate of humanity, right? Because right, the argument that exists, right, of where does life begin, or where did life begin? I think is the more proper way to phrase it. Is right, either you're on this side of creationism, or you're on the evolutionary side in which life can be created within a vacuum, or not necessarily within a vacuum, but circumstances can be good and create life. And right, you this is it's an ongoing debate that will never actually solve anything, right? Um, the more interesting, obviously, becomes the where does life lead to, um, and it is in the way that Dan Brown has written it, and the way the story goes, right, is that um, humanity and technology become intertwined within one another, and they become symbiotic, not necessarily symbiotic, but rather that they become fused in a way in which one does not survive without the other, right? And so you end up having this really difficult thing, right? Which is something that we're quite seeing now a lot, in which we are using artificial intelligence and these things to make decisions that they weren't necessarily intended for, and asking them to do hard things, right? And not because they're demanding in a way that is physically demanding, or in a way that would just take a lot of time. They're demanding because they require us to either make assumptions, or because that they are making decisions about the future of something, right? And to me, it is very much the same way as to why religion still exists, right? Because it is so much easier to claim anything and to exist in a world in which there are things that you get to say that is out of my control, right? And not just like at a personal level, but rather at a huge, significant level, right? The use of AI to make major financial decisions for companies, or to whether they're going to hire someone, or whether they should give insurance claims to people, right, is very much within line of, in my opinion, as this is what God has destined for us, the working in mysterious ways kind of deal, because it is us placing major decisions, or major factors in life and things like this out of our hands and placing into someone else's, right? And it is something that is so far beyond really what is anyone's real grasping of knowledge, or understanding, right? And so in that sense, right, I think Dan Brown is correct in this, right? um yeah, yeah. um I don't know. I think the book itself is very good, right? It's not the Robert Layton that I would want, but it's still a very good book. It's just a thriller instead. Um, I think that within this, right? What am I even trying to say? What am I even trying to say with this? I think within this, right, is that Dan Brown in a lot of ways has kept a kind of a series, not necessarily a series, but a genre that isn't gaining a lot of traction anymore. A extended lease on life that it probably wouldn't have had. Because I do think that this kind of story, this thriller story, or this investigative story, that isn't necessarily like a procedural crime drama, right? We're not talking a Sherlock Holmes here, but it's like isn't it really even either spy either? It's kind of spy, but it's not quite. It's more of just this like recurring thriller character that I mean, I think it's just the genre that's kind of gone by at this point, because I think with the way that we consume media, right? This is a story, right? I mean, this is 450 pages, which took me. I probably started reading about 9 o'clock this morning, so this was about 2 hours this morning, and then maybe another. I mean, if I read, usually I read about 60 to 70 pages in an hour. That's what, I mean, 6 hours ish of reading, 6 to 7 hours. Because some of these pages are much shortened or things like that, right? And so, right, that's an entire series of television for some people, right? And so and it's a lot easier to consume television or multiple movies in a row than it is to consume literature, which is why I think that, you know, this style of book is kind of on the out, right? Because even when we look at people that read a lot of literature, right, that literature tends to not necessarily slop, right? Because I think that there is very, very little media and art that can be considered slop, right? But so much of it is not something that takes time to consume, right? Rather, it is predictable or going through things, right? And it's the hallmark of it all, right? In which, right, these are still valuable to us in some way, but so often it is the same story. You just change the names and change the location a little bit, right? And even to the extent, right, that's what this is, right? Is that we have the outline of the story, and then we are just changing who the Robert Langdon attractive girl that is also incredibly smart is, and we're changing, you know, who he's trying to save, and then the rest of it just kind of falls in line with that. And we're like, the other thing he changes, you know, what art is he looking at this time, right? So yeah. I don't know. As the actual twist of the story, right, which is, I mean, spoiler alert for a book that came out in 2017, I believe. I think that's when this book came out. Is that, as it turns out, right, that our main scientist guy, who I don't even flipping remember his name, Kirsch, has created this artificial intelligence named Winston, who he has named after Winston Churchill. And within that, Kirsch has also found that he can create life out of nothing, right? If he replicates the primordial soup of the early Earth, and then you put enough electricity into it, and then you basically simulate what this looks like, right? Eventually you get the building of DNA, and he wants to make this announcement to the world, right? And of not only that, but then also that he predicts that humans and technology will become one and become intertwined with each other. He also makes a prediction to everyone. And so he sets up this huge press conference, and he tells Winston, his AI, that is years ahead of everyone else, that he has basically two objectives, right? He needs to release this, and he needs to draw as much media attention as he can to it. And so what this AI does is it basically orchestrates the entire novel, in which it is the AI that hires the assassin to then kill not only Kirsch, but then also the other members of the religious sects that he had met with beforehand. It is the AI that basically creates this entire setup and scavenger hunt to get as much attention onto the release of the presentation as possible, right? And it's just one of those. I mean, it brings up a very good philosophical point of why should we expect computers, as they're evolving, to make better decisions than humans do, right? Because as is kind of referenced at the very end of this, right, he makes Kirsch into another Jesus figure. He just Dan Brown just does love doing this, but it is the concept, right, of where in building a new religion, new belief system, right, it requires sacrifice. And so within Christianity, right, the base point is that God gave up his only son in order to give the world something to sacrifice, right? And now the Winston, the AI, is basically asking the same thing, right? Even though Kirsch was already going to die, right? Kirsch is shown to later have pancreatic cancer, and he was going to die within weeks anyways. And so the question becomes, right, is this something that we would expect a human to do, and therefore is this something that we would expect an AI to do, right? Of where an AI sacrifices its creator to create as much attention, which was the ultimate goal that Kirsch had wanted around this thing. Yeah. Other thoughts on the series. We kind of have this ongoing issue throughout the series of where, like, it is pretty consistent that all of our, like, good guy characters tend to be very, very specific people, and then all of our bad guy characters tend to be foreign nationals in some way, right? So that's kind of the thing that's kind of constantly going on, or portray themselves as foreign nationals, right? As we learn with the lost symbol, right? Malik is actually Solomon's son or whatever. So that's all that. I think you have this kind of awkward thing as well, right? Where, like, the first two books become kind of like the focal point of all of this, and then we get into the third book, and the third book references the first two books, which is kind of what you would expect, more so Da Vinci Code, which makes sense. And then we get into the fourth book, and I think Inferno mentions or references Angels, Demons, and Da Vinci Code, but not the lost symbol. And then we get to this one, in which the entirety of Inferno just kind of gets forgotten about. Because the whole point at the end of Inferno was that there was this virus that affected everyone in the world, in which it was a virus that made 1/3 of the world infertile, right? And then we get to this book in Origin, in which it's supposed to happen a couple years later. There's no direct reference to anything that's happened within Florence. There's no reference to anything that happened in America, right? There's some references to the Vatican, right? Which is kind of where we go with the Vatican and Rome, which is kind of where we go with Angels, Demons, and the Da Vinci Code. Or no, not that's more Paris. So it's definitely a lot more angels and demons. But then we go to this, and one of the key plot points that exists is that your Robert Langdon girl of the week, who I can't even remember her name, but as it turns out, right, she ends up getting proposed to by the Prince of Spain, and it's a very, very quick proposal, and because of that, she has not told him everything about herself, and it turns out that she cannot have children. And this becomes like a huge plot point as to why that she thinks the Prince of Spain is kind of involved in this whole issue, right? Of that he is the one that is targeting Kirsch because of connections and whatnot. Well, if Inferno is supposed to have happened and that 1/3 of the world is already infertile, I feel like this would be a lot more common of a thing to ask, right? And be and like nowhere does it get mentioned that like, oh yeah, by the way, like this has happened. It just kind of, right, which I think is just kind of a weird thing. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think it's just a very interesting thing, and we're like, when it comes to series like this, where you don't necessarily need to have read all of them to understand the next one, right? But then we constantly choose to refer to Angels and Demons and the Da Vinci Code, but really it's mostly Angels and Demons, and then talking about our future stories, right? I think it's just kind of a weird thing. I'm anxious to see how the next one goes, because I think that's releasing this year or next year. But that's Dan Brown origin.